This is the dog. Okay, this is the fifth part of Scruples and Gloom, the conclusion. So I'm going to try and read clearly and quickly because it might be a little long. The rest of the afternoon in the area north of Roswell and west of the Pecos River was filled with increasingly more guests, more food, more bottled water, more SPF, more pit stops, and increasing excitement for the impending fireworks display. As would be expected, every agent employed by Foundry Inc. was on security detail today. Lucas Green could be seen leaning against a food vendor truck, eating original Earth recipe food, a funnel cake paired with an ice cold root beer. Julie, the bubblegum rave nightmare, had brought her anti-gravity float skates. She was buzzing through the crowd, making children smile by switching her forearm touchscreen pad and making funny faces at them. She was also freely distributing small packets of paper and colored pencils for them. Agent 1 had just finished eating 2 corn dogs. He then inserted the wooden sticks under his lip, punched Agent 2 in the arm, and made an excessively loud lowing noise, pretending that he was a walrus. Immediately, Agents 2 and 1 were on the ground fighting. Agent 3 calmly walked over, grabbed them by the collars of their trench coats with one in each hand, bodily suspended them in the midair and for a moment, and then dropped them on their feet. 3 used one backhand each to slap them, and then he stood there glaring. Agent 2 went back to being vigilant. Agent 1 began working the crowd while talking into his hand as if it were a real portable two-way radio. Lily, Lila, and the director were behind the stage at a table with an oversized kitten and mouse face sunshade at it. They were drinking Americanos and eating Strive for the Summit cookies. Earl the octopus cook from the diner was running his own food vendor truck. Earl was in rare form while slinging breakfast food deliciously and efficiently for the uncountable hungry guests. Children and adults alike cheered as his 8 arms cooked and threw plates of food at them. Agent 1, who was still working the crowd, had just acquired information about an irregularity in security from his hand radio. Speaking rapidly in goofy radio jargon, 1 was trying to ascertain if it was some glitch or a real threat, as Lily and Lila Fox had personally cleared every guest present today. "Excuse me, folks, Foundry Security, please excuse the interruption," said Agent 1 as he jostled through the guests standing in the crowd. Then he spoke into his hand again, and his face was beaming with elation from learning the target had been spotted in the crowd by the airborne team. "Flyboys, come in, Flyboys, this is Big Daddy 1, over," said Agent 1 into his hand. Then a real noise, like the droning of a military cargo plane, followed by a squeaky voice that was barely audible over the droning, was heard. "Control, Big Daddy 1, Flyboys here, en route with the package, over." Agent 1 was indeed holding a real radio. 10-4 Flyboys, target Juliet Alpha November Echo is on point at signal, over, said Agent 1. Agent 1 began darting through the crowd. "Excuse me," bumping. "Foundry Security." Then he began jogging. "Nice balloon animal hat," as he rushed through the confused crowd of guests. Then Agent 1 found his mark and stopped, reached into his inner trench coat pocket, removed a flare gun, and fired it into the sky, scaring hundreds of people in the dense crowd. Instantly, Agent Jane Rask was on top of Agent 1 in the dirt and sand, saying, "What are you doing?" Then Jane heard 1's radio chirp. "10-4, Big Daddy 1, we have visual on your mark, ETA 60 seconds, over." Jane's voice contorted in anger, and she grabbed fistfuls of 1's trench coat and demanded, "Where are they?" Now fearful for his own personal safety, 1 used an index finger and pointed to the sky, to which effect Jane stood up and scoured the horizon. What she saw was a large cloud of mosquitoes flying with something in a sling. As the cloud cleared Jane, Agent 1's radio squawked, "Big Daddy 1, target acquired, package away." The sling fell slack over Jane's head high above her. The package fell and she caught it in midair. Jane stood over one, holding the package in one hand while scolding him. Is this a waterproof transport capsule from the laundromat system? Covered in dust and sand, Agent One grinned from the ground broadly while saying, Marinos, ta-da! Talia and Tiana, the twins from a long-forgotten planet, were the last two beings of their race. Babylon had been destroyed ages ago, and the only reason they had survived was they had flown to another planet and were playing with their toys under an oak tree when it had exploded. The twins could inherently fly under any or no atmosphere, and they did not have internal organs. The twins' body composition was that of a shell of pure iron with a nickel alloy internal lining. The outer iron shell was pigmented with a biochemical compound called rubyrin that made them look bright red. The twins' hair was green and wavy, appearing to flow like quicksilver, but it was in fact liquid chlorine. This combination of shiny red skin and wavy green hair caused the twins to resemble old-fashioned rock candy pieces. The twins had no internal organs because their iron and nickel alloy shell housed a finite volume of a chemical called pure liquid fluorine, the most powerful oxidizer known. The twins were raised long ago to understand that if their shells of iron were ever cracked or damaged, and should their fluorine insides leak out and come into contact with water or even their own iron skin, that devastating reactions would quickly occur. Firstly, the fluorine meets the air, and then an oxidizing reaction will start producing oxygen gas, which will in turn, that oxygen gas would react with their liquid chlorine hair, producing dangerous chlorine gas. Secondly, when fluorine reacts with water, it decomposes into the highly corrosive hydrofluoric acid with a pH of 3.27. Very acidic. Finally, when the fluorine meets their iron skins, it vigorously reacts to create iron 3 fluoride. This process is also called iron burning, and is extremely dangerous. So the twins understood that if they were ever injured, broken, or on the verge of death, their bodies would be reacting and destroying everything around them. When their planet, Babylon, was wiped from existence, this deeply saddened the twins. For many years, they had been working in secret under the assumed identity of the director of Foundry Inc., simply perpetuating the machine while making their own subtle power plays. Talia and Tiana now had one goal today: total annihilation. Before Jane Rask was Agent Jane Rask, she had a job interview at the Home Office of Espionage and Enrichment at Foundry Inc. The job interview was a week-long physical, psychological, weeding out process designed by the director and Opal Rinderpest. Interviews always began on Mondays, so naturally when Jane had finished with top scores by lunch on Wednesday, she found herself being pulled aside. As Jane stood in front of the director with his opulent but necessary office, receiving compliments for quick completion and top marks, she was winded and moving her brunette hair away from her face with her left hand as she said, "Thank you, sir." Elated, but ever under self-control, the director saw the web of skin on her left hand between her thumb and index finger with the W tattoo. The director smiled broadly, shook Jane's hand, and said, "Welcome aboard, Agent Rask." "Thank you, sir," said Jane, smiling. Now, on the day of the director's birthday, sunshine, sunshine everywhere, but not a drop to drink. The director's birthday plans were going exactly as orderly and chaotically as planned. At this point in the day, all of the boring speeches from the stuffy, ultra-wealthy friends of the director were now over. Jane was eating her sandwich from Hackensack when Lucas approached her with an ice-cold, foamy root beer for her as he winked while walking up. Jane scrunched her nose at him and took in the spiced carbonated soda. Lucas curled his arm around Jane's waist and she promptly stepped on his toes. Jane smiled at Lucas and she chewed her submarine from the questionably connected shop in New Jersey. The director took the stage, flanked on each side by Lily and Lila Fox. The trio raised their arms, and everyone in the crowd followed suit and cheered. Then, a droning sound could be heard in the distance in conjunction with music. The droning noise and the music were now competing with each other. It was now clear that the droning was again the Mosquito Courier Services, and the music was a selection from Original Earth's classical music called The Ride of the Valkyries. The combination of the purpose-driven music and the droning had now whipped the crowd into a very excited state. The Mosquito Couriers made a sharp banking maneuver and their cargo sling bulged and pulled under tension. The sling was deployed and 1,000,000 hand-inflated balloons fell and spread across the airspace above the crowd. As the balloons reached the fingertips of those taller in the crowd, they were swatted, passed to children, grabbed for more, and then one popped. In a chain reaction, balloons began popping like automatic gunfire. Agents Rask 3, 2, and 1 were calm yet vigilant. Agent 1 was jumping and running through the crowd while drawing back against an invisible bow, shooting invisible arrows at the bursting balloons. Finishing her root beer, Jane disposed of all of her food wrappers and cup, wiped her hands, and grabbed Lucas around the waist with a blast of forced air and blurred colors. Jane rushed them underneath the kitten and mouse face sunshade table behind the stage. Jane interlocked her hands with Lucas's as he was visibly confused, and she shook her head, shushing him without breaking eye contact. Now, the director began a very pompous and conceited speech. Suddenly, for Lucas Green, all sounds, the crowd, the balloons, the director, his thoughts, were all impossible to hear except Jane's voice. Jane looked over her shoulder at the horizon. The sun appeared a deep orange-red sliver over the distant ground. Jane removed a pack of cigarettes from her trench coat, removed the last two, and pitched the pack aside. Holding each cigarette upright in between their faces, Jane said, "I have this many minutes left." Looking forward, Lucas could see the sunset on the distant horizon. Jane slid one cigarette behind her ear, lit the other, and began her emotional plea to Lucas. Drawing on her cigarette, Jane raised her left hand to Lucas, fingers spread and down, pointing to the... There we go. The to capital A tattoo, saying, "This is, you are the Akron android. I know," said Lucas. Jane inverted her hand to the tattoo, showed W, saying, "This is a capital W. We talked about this," said Lucas, who was now uncomfortable. Exhaling and drawing the cigarette again so her words commingled with the freshly exhaled smoke, Jane was leading Lucas. "Come on, bomb expert. I thought you were a chemist." Lucas then remembered that a W with a strikeout means water reactive. For certain elements that react violently when they come in contact with water. Jane closed Lucas's open mouth by gently lifting his jaw. Exhaling, Jane gave Lucas a warm, reassuring smile that was tainted with the knowledge of her impending responsibility. Speaking in and exhaling smoke, Jane said, "Lucas, I am a weapon. I was designed as a weapon that takes in information and emotions to best calculate collateral damage to my target. Ever since I hacked into the emotion chip I borrowed from the Weasel Brothers, I have slowly overwritten my source code, my base programming. You taught me more than that chip." Jane now lit the second cigarette off the near-gone cherry ember of the first and pointed straight up, saying, "Do not let go of this umbrella. Something is about to happen. I cannot stop it, but I can stop them. I was designed as a weapon." Jane